Well, Brian, how are you doing this morning? This is Brian Wang and Randy Kirk. We are on Next Big Future, and I'm in charge today. Brian said, Randy, you be in charge.
Mhm.
Well, actually, it all started with a very funny story. Well, it's not that funny. Of course, we have these fires in Los Angeles, not funny at all. Actually, my old neighborhood, the place I first lived on 4th Street in Santa Monica when I moved to the West Side to go to UCLA. That street, that location was actually uh, under re, you know, suggested evacuation. So I know that whole neighborhood in the Palisades extremely well. Lots of places that I know that were, burned to a crisp. That they're, old haunts of mine. The Will Rogers cabin, all kinds of interesting places that are no longer. But in the course of that, Brian, I started thinking about kind of first principles. Why are things done the way they are? I don't know if that ever happens to you. I think it does.
Yes, I do. I think about that all the time.
So, anyway, out of that, and let me share my screen. Out of all of that, all of a sudden, I had this idea. And the idea, well, let me say the idea before I share the screen. The idea was they use apparently about the city of Los Angeles has 7 helicopters. That's their total. That's what they own. 4 or 5 big ones and a couple of small ones. And then the county has another, I forget the number now, actually. I want to say it's less than a dozen or around a dozen between helicopters and fixed wing. That's what they have for the entire county, for all of Los Angeles County. Now, we had 6 fires going. And that's not unusual. When these Santa Anas blow, we can have multiple fires. People that are sitting here going, wow, this is, the worst fire ever. And, every year, pretty much, we have a lot of fires. Last year, the fire season, if you will, the season of 2024, we basically didn't have any fires. And that's part of the problem. We didn't have any Santa Ana winds that I can remember all year long. And then all of a sudden, here in January, we get these massive Santa Ana winds. Other people that are blaming, what do you call it, global warming, climate change, whatever, are saying, oh, the Santa Ana winds are happening more often, or we're having more of these fires. Just not true. The
Mhm.
Santa Ana
Right.
winds, the Santa Ana winds were here before there was a Santa Ana.
Right.
Because it's a geographic thing about canyons and inversion layers and stuff. And so the Santa Ana winds come. I've been here. I've been in Los Angeles since '65. I can remember 2 years after I arrived here, a fire that burned in the San Gabriel Mountains for 3 weeks.
Mhm.
There's nothing they could do. It just burned and burned and burned. You can see it from space. At that time,
Mhm.
65, we could already see things from space. Did you know
Mhm.
that?
Yes.
So anyway, this is an ongoing thing, and it just seems to me that nobody has stepped back. And Brian, you and I talked about it a little bit.
Mhm.
Things like putting the power lines underground. This doesn't seem
Mhm.
to be that expensive compared to 150 billion in possible damages.
Mhm.
So there's a bunch of things like that we could talk about for an hour probably.
Yeah.
Uh, that would be, you know, I'm not sure that either one of us have any more knowledge or experience. I'm not a firefighter. The closest I come to being a firefighter is that my son-in-law is a fire marshal.
Well, I've studied the problem of wildfires. I live near San Francisco Bay Area, and there's these large fires around Napa
Yeah.
and around the Bay Area. So I've looked at the um, forest management issues a lot.
Mhm.
So you have to have these large fire breaks. I looked at a 80-page, 100-page document from 50, 80 years ago, where it's like, here's how you manage a forest, right? And you have to like dig these large trenches because when you get a huge fire over many square miles, it gets its own climate and stuff because they're sucking in all this air at high, hurricane speeds, and that means it would be sucking in and blowing out, you know, um, uh,
Embers,
trees and things
yes.
at high speed, 100 miles, 200 miles an hour. So it'll be firing off embers miles ahead of it,
Yeah.
right? So that's the reason that it's not an ordinary, one house fire, three alarm fire with three houses. It's like 1,000 houses as this inferno. And I also looked at um, citywide infernos because I've looked at the problem of, you know, uh, in nuclear war, what happens when you hit a city. And I got the paper written by the U.S. military after the Hiroshima bombings, Nagasaki bombings, and the city firestorms that they created on purpose when they were fighting in World War II,
Hmm,
right?
yeah.
So again, I've looked at how they analyze that in terms of like flammable. But I don't think we're going to talk about that issue, but we can have that information as background. You talked about using drones
Well,
to fight the fire. Yeah.
right. Well, and then if you take what you were just talking about and you start to think about there are about four or five different kinds of fires. So you have an actual forest fire. It's a very different thing from a brush fire, okay,
Mhm.
or a chaparral fire. The chaparral fires are all over the world, South Africa, Australia, the Western United States, Canada. These fires, they're not usually as big of a problem if they're in the chaparral, and
Mhm.
you can usually contain them within a reasonable amount of time. Now you add a little bit of plant coverage, a little bit of trees and stuff, and all of a sudden you've got a whole different problem because then the palm fronds in particular are notorious for tearing loose, becoming a little whirly gig and going miles and miles and miles, landing on a roof and torching a house. So, but when you get into the residential areas, now you've got a completely different thing. You don't have an ability to build fire breaks in a residential area. You
Mhm.
don't have the ability to, usually you can't even get ahead of the fire. And so those are some of the things that started concerning me. And I thought, in a residential neighborhood like the Palisades, what would be what would be wouldn't it be better to have more air fighting equipment as opposed to seven or 12
Right.
be able to handle these? And that's where the first idea came in. I could picture, using existing equipment, existing fixed wing or helicopters, but 50 of them, coming in one after another, getting their water, coming in and firebomb, hitting the fire with the water, and then that one goes away, and the next one comes in right behind it and hits another area. And potentially some of those would be getting ahead of the fire and
Yep.
drenching areas ahead of the fire. Others would be going right to the heart of the fire. Others would be putting out embers behind the fire because the firefighters can't go in. It's too hot.
Right.
So the result of that, all of that, now I'll share my screen, so I just had Grok. I said, give me some drones dropping water over a fire. Well, anyway, could you imagine? Do you think there's any trolls on X? Do you think there's anybody that
Yes, there are trolls on X. There's trolls all over the internet. Yeah.
so anyway, a few trolls decided that this was, little tiny drones, these hand drones, these small drones that we all use as
Yeah.
hobbyists. And so the ridicule became massive. Well,
Hmm.
the good news out of, in my experience with brainstorming,
Yeah.
is there's something we call in brainstorming, there's no bad ideas. Because
Right.
the worst idea can then be manipulated by the rest of the people in the brainstorming group in order to come up
Hmm.
with great ideas.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, a lot of trolls, hundreds of would you believe millions and millions of impressions on this,
Yeah.
uh, and people saying this is the dumbest idea I've ever seen in my entire life. Anyway, but other
Yeah.
people
Hmm.
who visualized it differently, who actually
Hmm.
looked at it and said, "Oh, these are, large drones,
Yeah.
and maybe this is an idea." And so then the conversation started going back and forth, and we had a brainstorming session
Hmm.
online.
Hmm.
It's been progressing quite nicely. So, Brian, what was your first impression when I told you about a massive drone strike on the Palisades fire?
Um, I do not think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. Actually, there are um, um, videos of Chinese firefighting drones fighting high-rise fires. I sent a link to you. I should have got to you earlier, but basically it shows fire hoses attached to somewhat smaller drones, and they have the fire hose spraying out from it. But I think it probably limited to, a few 100 feet going up in the air
Right.
to fight the fires. Um, and it looks very much like your picture, except they have a hose attached to it.
And that
Um,
and that drone was probably about maybe the size of a car, kind of like the New Jersey drone size. With
the Chinese firefighting drones are smaller, but at least the ones that you know have been around for a while, because the drone itself is just flying and carrying the hose. That's it. It's
right,
lifting up the hose. That's what
right.
its purpose is doing. But so those, I think, these think ideas can work. And then people have been using um, small planes like seaplanes and stuff that scoop up water from lakes, and then they go drop a ton of water, or a few tons of water onto fires. That's
Yeah,
that's a common practice.
yeah, we'll take a look at that in a second. And of course,
Yeah,
that's where my idea first
yeah,
came from. Is why don't we have a
yeah,
lot more of those? So anyway, I as a result of all this, of course, not only was there a lot of back and forth with people that actually knew what they were talking about compared to me,
yeah,
but also it caused me to start doing some investigation. And what I found is that Griff Aviation
yeah.
has come up with an answer to the drone-based thing.
Hmm.
It's a Norwegian company, and they've created three drones. They
Hmm.
have the Griff 300, the 800, and the 300, I guess, can lift up to 500 pounds of whatever it's lifting. And
Yeah,
then 800 now is actually capable of doing 1,760 pounds. Here's a picture of the Griff drone. So that's a pretty cool looking drone, I gotta say.
yeah. Yes, it looks great.
So if you can lift 1,760 pounds,
Hmm.
what you're talking about there is about 2,000, I'm sorry, about 200 gallons
Hmm.
of water that you could lift.
Hmm.
And it has the ability to stay airborne for up to 45 minutes.
Hmm.
But they said that they can outfit it, instead of outfitting with batteries, they could outfit it with traditional fuel and it would be able to stay up longer. Um, anyway, that drone can be outfitted for conventional. I'm sorry, it's already been approved and certified
Hmm.
by the American Federal Aviation Administration. And by the way, it's designed for military activity and firefighting. That is
Hmm.
exactly what they had in mind when they designed the drone.
Hmm.
So this would be, I think, as far as I can tell online, the most sophisticated drone. If you, when I say drone, of course, a drone just means unmanned,
Yeah.
autonomous or automated by remote. So when we call, but the drone idea, I think in people's head now has become these multicopters or quadcopters, or in this case, I think it's eight. I could be wrong, but yeah, I think there's eight blades on this one. So,
In
you
terms of advanced drones, let me just also mention that the U.S. military, DARPA, and the Air Force have been working on automating the fighter planes and other all the military planes, right?
right,
So they can do it, with FSD, Tesla FSD like software, where okay, they upgrade it and it's flying in there. They also have something they can put into the pilot's seat, like a robot, but it's actually far cruder, not like a Tesla bot, but just like something that just works the pedals and the steering wheel and stuff like that.
hmm,
And they can basically automate any plane, helicopter, or other thing. So they may have done that. I think their focus has been on, their fighter jets, because that's what they
right,
focus on.
right,
But the principle is that you could, uh, it would not be a huge challenge to make any seaplane, helicopter unmanned,
right,
where either you have something a device that you stick into the seat, the pilot seat, and operate the controls, or you just have the software where you like can remove the controls and then make it so that it could operate. So when we say most advanced drones, we can also say that any plane can become unmanned. Because right now you have autopilot flying our passenger planes. The pilots just like flip on autopilot. They're there to, in case things go wrong.
Right.
But really, when you're on a plane flying from, LA over to Tokyo, most of the time it's takeoff and landing is by an autopilot.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And of course we see these drone displays that the Chinese are doing instead of fireworks now, using 10,000 drones or more in a single effort, where these are all AI driven. They don't run into each other, and they can create these images, which are like pixels, each drone
Right.
becoming a pixel, and they're
Yeah.
creating these amazing images. So the precision with which they're flying and not
Mhm.
running into one another is absolutely incredible.
Right.
So it seems to me that if we have that kind of capability with regard to something where we're just having some fun, that being able to move these drones in great precision into a
Mhm.
fire area
Mhm.
in huge strike force at huge strike force levels is
Yeah.
possible.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So then the question becomes why or why not? But
Mhm.
let's also look at uh, the existing probably best firefighting equipment that we have from the air is this Canadian product. And this one is I have just, just a second here. This is a CH-47. I'm sorry, this is a, let me say that again. This is a CL-415 water bomber. It's a Canadian product. And they hold a lot of water.
Mhm.
Um, they are capable of scooping up from a lake, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
As you can see, they have the ability to land in water. But the funny part is, we don't have any of them in Los Angeles. We don't have any of them in San Francisco. When we have
Mhm.
a fire, we call Canada,
Yeah.
and then they fly them down.
Right.
So again, having them, actually positioned where the
Yeah.
fires take place would seem like a really good idea.
And just for people who don't know, the California has like 30 million, 40 million acres of forest. Every year, on average, you have about 2 million acres of wildfires in the forest, right? And it only gets more notice when it's like, okay, now it's this 100,000 acre fire is threatening Napa, or the fire is in Los Angeles.
Right,
And Los Angeles is about 500 some square miles, so about 300,000 acres. And um, these fires currently have burned on the order of 15%, I think, of Los Angeles, with one fire being about 30,000 acres, 40,000 acres, the other one being 15,000. There's a couple other smaller ones that, and still not contained. So,
right. Yeah, and these fires are, I'm in Riverside, 60 miles away from LAX. I have a hill behind me with Chaparral. We have fires on that hill pretty much every year.
yeah.
Pretty much every year. And it's just they use helicopters for that with those. They go to a lake with a big hose. The hose, are a scoop, a bag that scoops up the water, and they drag that over. These seem to be primitive in my thinking,
Yeah.
even compared to this Canadian product.
Mhm.
Much less the idea of using something like that Griff drone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So then the possibility again now is, could we build by design, whether it's Griff or somebody else, could we be using 100 drones? Could they be
Mhm.
pre-positioned, to where they could be to the fire in an hour, no matter
Yeah.
where it was? Could we be getting in? Now, there is the issue of course, wind. And
Mhm.
wind impacts the Canadian drones that certainly impact helicopters. The wind would certainly impact the Griff.
Mhm.
But that's true a percentage of the time.
Right.
So we do not always have 60 to 100 mile an hour winds. that keep these aircraft on the ground. Um,
The other thing is that if like, and the fire itself could be generating wind.
right.
So you have to be able to manage that. And you can also look at either you fly over it and drop really high or drop your stuff. And we've seen pictures of them dropping sand and other things, helicopters dropping stuff, video. But the other thing is that you can also fly them up to support the firefighters. So for people who don't know, currently the firefighters in Los Angeles, a bunch of brave firefighters, are operating mostly without a lot of water. That there was something that people that they did not fill the Palisade Reservoir, which looked like a massive, massive swimming pool, cement that it would hold 100 million or over 100 million gallons, which is like 2 million barrels of water. And for some reason, they had it shut down for maintenance, and the pumps turned off and other stuff like that. So there's been a bunch of controversies around that. So if you had millions of drones, each carrying a ton of water, that would be about 6 barrels of water, 240 gallons, that you could then resupply
Ah,
firefighters with water, right?
supply the
So,
reservoir or whatever it is that they need to draw from.
right. Yeah. So they could shuttle water at a reasonable volume. So if you had 1,000 of them, you could be moving in a quarter million or maybe even a million gallons of water over to firefighters. Like the Los Angeles right by the ocean, and Palisades is right on the ocean. So you could just move it the 1 mile in
Right.
to start fighting the fires, shelling water in volume.
All right. So then we talked about salt water because obviously, if there's no lakes or if there's no reservoir, we do have these drones. I mean, drones.
Planes, yeah.
Canadian
Seaplanes,
plane. These
yeah.
Canadian planes and other tankers have been dipping into the Pacific Ocean to fight the Palisades fire, and it's
Hmm.
not unusual for them to use salt water, although it is the last resort.
Hmm.
So the salt water is not just a problem in terms of vegetation, which is what people think of immediately, but it's also a problem in terms of the equipment, the pumps, et cetera, on the planes or the helicopters. But it is something that is cleanable
Yeah.
after they're done doing it. They can rinse it with clean water and solve the problem. And you might end up having to replace a pump or something, but that's a pretty small price again compared to the loss of life and our property. But so the saltwater solution is a solution, and yes, it can be a problem in terms of vegetation. But I can't tell you how many people saying, "Gosh, here in the Midwest, we salt the roads
Hmm.
during the snow season in order to be able to drive at all. We put all this massive amounts of salt on the roads. That salt on the roads does not stay on the roads. It ends up going into the ditches. It ends up getting onto the lawns. It ends up getting into the system.
Hmm.
And somehow we still manage to grow lots of good crops out here. So salt is a problem. It is a mitigable.
Yep.
If you do it in a situation like this, there are things you can do after desalinization, adding organic matter, or using specific plant species to help restore the health of the land is possible. And they're also, based on my reading, I could not find very much science on the actual after a fire.
Right.
Um, so when you're dropping it from these heights and you're dropping, it's like a mist. You're
Yeah.
never like having a good rain.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure that that's really going to be a significant problem after the fire. And I couldn't find I couldn't find very much science at all in terms of the aftermath.
Well, just if people think about logically, tsunamis happen all the time. You have the big one in Japan, where water came in like dozens of miles, 50 miles inland from a massive wave. Los Angeles on the coast, Los Angeles could have a tsunami
Right.
where, something struck in the right spot, an earthquake, you could get, this large wave and, like half of Los Angeles, even all of Los Angeles could get covered with salt water from a tsunami. So those are natural events, and the land recovers. It's fine. Japan continue to grow food. You know, it's not that big a deal because it does happen. So, and sweating over. The other thing is that Los Angeles City itself is not where the main farmland is in California. The
Right.
main farmland is over, in Central
Not
Valley or the
anymore.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's like mostly Los Angeles, that 500 square miles is
President.
roads and yeah, cement things. So I think not a problem.
All right. So then if you don't use salt water, if you want to eliminate that problem or that issue, and you want to be sure that that's not an issue, of course, we have a drought. Now,
Yeah.
the California drought that's taking place right now is not a very significant drought. We had 2 years in a row of excellent water, I mean, excellent rain. So the reservoirs are in good shape. But we haven't had any rain for 9 months, and we haven't had any rain this season yet. So people don't realize that aren't in this area. I mean, literally, we had a couple of little tiny rain showers in the summer. We call them monsoons. They come usually up from Mexico because of hurricanes down that way. So we had a couple of little monsoonal days, but other than that, we haven't had any rain for 9 months, and literally none in the season, which starts about October 1st, maybe September 15th. So the season so far, we've had not a drop of rain. So it's dry, and after 2 years of good rain, you get a tremendous buildup of vegetation. And then you have a dry year. Of course, it dries the vegetation out. Then the winds come and you're toast, so to speak. So what about the lack of available water? So we've got the saltwater idea, but other people have talked about gray water.
Right.
And so I decided to do a little thinking about gray water, and uh, uh, we have all kinds of arguments and discussions about gray water in Los Angeles because it's a great solution for supplementing the in bad water years as opposed to desalinization. Now, parentheses, Elon Musk says that he can now create a desalinization plant that would make water at the same rate, at the same cost as we have regular water now. So that's a whole nother issue, maybe for another day.
Right.
But I think that's a great idea, and I think we
Mm.
should be doing it. But gray water, of course, is water that is basically good enough to drink, by the way.
Mm. Yeah.
But most people don't want to drink it. So
Right.
you have this, oh no, I'm not going to drink that stuff because it's
Mm.
not as pure as the drinking water that we're used to. It has been filtered through gazillion ways of being filtered, but it's not
Mm.
quite as pure. So what do you think? Do you think we should use gray water for fighting fires?
Yeah, we should use all the above, all the kinds of water. The other thing is that the California has not, and particularly Los Angeles, has not made new reservoirs. And this is a constant controversy for the last, 50, 60 years. I think the last one they made maybe 50 some years ago. And the population has doubled since then, from 20 to 40 million in California, and the population in Los Angeles has increased a bunch too. So the basic infrastructure of water reservoirs, which you need because it's functionally like similar to a desert, needs to be maintained. And of course, when you do make a reservoir, you have to keep them filled. So doing things like this to trap rainwater. There's some law about protecting some kind of fishes and stuff where they say you can't capture rainwater, and President Trump has famously talked about uh, capturing that water. But it goes to thinking ahead, building what you need to build, so that when things happen, you're ready. And so I think that capturing rainwater, making the infrastructure, making more reservoirs in general, making doing controlled small burns.
Mhm.
So um, so if you don't want to fight a fire when it happens randomly and you're not ready and it's gonna be
In the
bigger than
wind,
you
in
can
the wind.
handle, with the wind, you do it when it's not windy. You start the fire yourself, firefighters, and then you burn the brush that you were talking about the problem, and then it won't be fuel lying around on the ground waiting for when you're not ready to deal with it, right?
Right.
Florida, which has comparable amounts of forest to California, does about 2 million acres of controlled burn
Mm,
every year.
mm,
And California does about 50,000 acres,
mm.
right? But then they have 2 million acres, 3 million acres of wildfires. So basically, either you have controlled or uncontrolled burn. It
Right,
burns either way. You just have to choose when.
right,
So if you have the laws set up to do more controlled burns, and it should be as simple as, okay, I'm gonna do it. Okay, you can get firefighter notice. Here's the plan. Boom, 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 approved in half an hour because everyone knows the right rules to do it. And then five guys can go out, with some firefighters standing by just in case things, don't get under control. But you do it at the right time, and everyone knows, oh yeah, these conditions are good. So then you can just boom, 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 doing 100 control burns of 100 acres, within California. So even within Los Angeles, there was a few 100-acre fire that what didn't cause a problem where it got close to the Getty Museum,
mhm,
the hill around it, a bunch of stuff, and it got, burned down. You can see that, okay, they had to burn and it was controlled,
right,
right? Yeah, that was still a wildfire that's happened to be a smaller one,
right,
previous year. So, so I think making the water infrastructure more reservoirs, gray water capture, rainwater capture, converting of sewage and other things, and having those things available, and then doing control burns and creating fire breaks. The fire breaks need to be, um, ideally a mile across, 2 miles across because of these flaming embers. But if you at least have more areas of cleared,
right,
no brush things, it would be a line where it's like, okay, once we lose this square mile of the Palisades, we have a line where we can start holding it,
right,
right? So it was just like for trench warfare in World War One, or the trench warfare going on in the Ukraine-Russian war, where you have layers of trenches,
mhm,
right? It's like, okay, I'm here, fall back to the next line, fall
right,
back to the next line, right?
right,
And having it only when the thing has already started is bad. You need to like pre-make it so
right.
that you can have these positions to go to.
All right. So then my thought process kept going, and I thought to myself, what about the boring company?
Yes.
Why wouldn't the boring company be able to create the new reservoirs?
Mhm.
So instead of having them as lakes, all right, where you have exposure where the water is being evaporated off,
Mhm.
why wouldn't we have, if you're talking about gray water, and
Mhm.
you're also talking about possibly water runoff? I don't know if people have ever seen the LA River during a rainstorm, but it is overflowing. It's massive amounts of water that are just going out to the ocean, and that could be diverted into tunnels. So I'm thinking that we could have tunnels, easy, plenty of room for tunnels. There's tons and tons of space. Wouldn't use up any land that people would be sad to see go. So you
Mhm.
have these tunnels where you are trapping this water. It's not being evaporated off. Same thing with regard to the gray water. You could be putting gray water into these tunnels, and then, as we already know, these planes and helicopters and the potential drones are equipped with these massive tubes that they let down into the lakes, and then they suck the water up into the vehicles, and then away they go. So
Yeah.
it would be no problem at all to be able to suck the water out of these tunnels. I'm sure that there's a bunch of reasons why this hasn't been done, but one would be the huge cost of creating a great tunnel. But
Mhm.
now Elon has solved that. They're not expensive to build anymore. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Roman aqueducts, where they had tunnels, and basically the massive sewer systems. You just choose to scale that up and to again build ahead, and then work with. There are subterranean caverns and stuff, so you work with the local above and below ground geology to determine where the best place to create some kind of storage.
Yeah, in fact, in Southern California, the largest reservoirs of water are actually underground lakes
Mhm.
out in the Palm Springs area, the Paris and that area.
Mhm.
Okay, so then I thought, oh, all right, this is the above ground situation that we have with regard to these fires. The ability to bring in aircraft is limited sometimes by the winds, especially in the very beginning of the fires. Sometimes that's when the winds are the highest, and also the manufactured the fire manufacturing its own weather system is at its greatest problem. So what about the ground game? What are we doing with regard to the ground game? So you sent me a picture of this particular vehicle right here. I
Yeah.
love this. This is explain what this is.
I think this is a Hungarian vehicle that it uses Soviet technology. It's basically a firefighting tank. It's used to get near oil well fires. So Russia is one of the largest oil producers in the world, and there's a long history of firefighting against oil rigs. There was a famous guy, older guy like you and me remember, Red Adair, who they actually made a movie about with John Wayne in 1968, The Hellfighters, where they fight oil rig fires. Um, and it was like these oil fires where they have flames shooting up massively into the air. Like one fire that they had, I think, in the UK or Algeria, they called the devil's cigarette lighter. Basically, like it's a massive, like 200 foot, flame going up. So a lot of heat coming off those oil well fires. You got to get close. You got to spray, um, have firefighters spray onto this vehicle to kind of keep if it was manned. And they in the old days they were manned. They would spray water onto it so it could get closer. But then you still need to have smell protection because of the intense heat of the oil well fire. Get close enough, spray special foam or sand or do other things to then suppress the or cap the oil well fires. And there were multiple also on the ocean. You have the the ocean rigs, and they have like these tugboats spraying water onto it. So you need to have these things to fight the oil and gas fires.
So Jamie Heineman,
Yeah,
you might remember him from MythBusters.
yeah.
So
The guy with the mustache.
he
Yeah,
has a mustache and he's a very droll guy. Anyway,
yeah.
Jamie, he hooked up with Palmer Luckey, who was one of the Oculus co-founders and a billionaire. The two of them teamed up, and Jamie is a professor right now, but he also does some inventions and has his own lab and stuff. And he was thinking about all these same issues. He lived in the Southern California area also and knew what the problem was. So he's been working on this one, and he actually has this working version. And they apparently this is also designed to be remote controlled or autonomous. And what he's basically done, he's got a 10, 100 gallons of fire retardant and 1,000 gallons of water that will fit in this thing. And basically, though, it also has a special plumbing system inside underneath this aluminum cover. Underneath, you have this plumbing system that's spraying constantly spraying, just like you were mentioning, the firemen might be spraying on to make it happen. The hope of this one is this will go where firemen can't go. So you
Mhm.
need to keep it cool and you need to keep the things protected, wiring and things that might otherwise be exposed. So it's got an internal spray going on as well as a spray that's hitting the treads, tank treads down there. So he started working on this about 5 years ago. I could not find recent information on whether or not it's actually ever been deployed or whether, where he is on it right now. But it was, as you can see, the thing was completed. Now, again, we're doing these videos. Part
I think it probably has been completed. My guess is because Palmer Luckey has a multi-billion-dollar drone company called Anduril.
oh,
So
that's his
so
name.
he, so
Goodness.
he Anduril makes these largest drones, so like stand taller than a person. They take off with the propellers, turbofans on the bottom, and then they launch up and they turn around. So then they are built far tougher than regular drones, and so they're a flying battering ram, so they can take out anti-missile systems. So he's beginning, loads of money to develop those things for the Air Force and stuff like that. So if Palmer also wants to make ground drones, which I'm sure he's doing, then he would make these. If he didn't have sales before, I think he has sales now.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. So again, this seems obvious to me. Maybe it's not so obvious, but I think if Jamie was interested in this, he's a much better inventor than I am. So I could just imagine, you again, if you had even 10 of these for the Palisades fire, these would be able to go into the residences, right into the hottest part of the fire, begin to either get ahead of it, or be able to knock down the hottest points on the fire and keep it from being able to send off embers upstream. So, fire department, let's go.
Mhm.
Let's get going on this stuff.
Right.
So, so then people brought up cost,
Mhm.
and yesterday the All In podcast did a very long, almost half of their program yesterday was about the fire, because most of these guys on the All In podcast have lived in the Palisades area, are in the Santa Monica area, know the area well, so it's very personal to them, as it was to me. And the so they spent a lot of time on it, and so they started talking about the expense. Well, in Florida and in Los Angeles and other parts of California right now, there's a real problem getting insurance.
Mhm.
And these guys were, I think, incorrect in stating that there's a lot more fires. What we have is a lot more property to burn. And the
Yeah.
property that can burn is in wooded or other areas that are fire prone. So, as you pointed out, the population has doubled over X number of years. But if you go back 120 years, we had way more fires.
Right.
Way. I mean, we're talking about way more acreage burned every year in the 20s and the 10s than is burned now. The problem is that it's burning up property, which is creating massive amounts of loss. And the insurance company is like, see ya, we can't do this. Uh,
Mhm.
and so it's getting harder and harder to get insurance. A bunch of insurance companies pulled out. State Farm famously pulled out a lot of policies right in that Palisades area last year. And so the insurance cost is one aspect of it. One way or another, you need to be able to insure your home. And so, what is the cost of that compared to the cost of some of this equipment? But this particular fire, that when I say the fire, the six fires in LA right now, some people are estimating at 150 billion in losses. I guarantee you could build an army of these drones and these land drones for a lot less than 150 billion dollars.
Yeah. It's just penny wise, pound foolish. That like leading up to this fire, famously the mayor of Los Angeles was trying to cut the fire department budget by $30 million.
And
It's like
the governor cut the statewide budget by 100 million dollars.
right, right. So and now we're the $150 billion people say, okay, well, most insurance companies pulled out. It's going to be declared a federal disaster.
Right.
It's going to get nationalized, and it's going to come out of our taxes and stuff like that because we're going to pay to fix it, which is not to say the wrong thing, but it's like again just like controlled uncontrolled wildfires or controlled burn or pre-spending the money to fix and minimize the problems ahead of time or pay for it after.
Right.
And now we're going to be paying for it after because it's going to be $150 million. It's this could become the largest disaster financially of any kind. Previously, it's been, like the Katrina hurricane, 180 some billion dollars, like 20% more fire, and then we're right there in terms of the amount of damage this thing's going to cause. And unlike the hurricane, which like mostly a large scale natural thing that hits, these fires could have been managed, with control burn, with preparation, having water in the reservoir. We could have reduced it. Just to say, well, Los Angeles can burn, it's like, with that kind of thinking, like, why are you building Los Angeles at all, right? So if we do build Los Angeles, we have to have control burns, create fire breaks, have this kind of equipment, have the water. It's just foolish not to have the necessary, water storage systems and the firefighting equipment to do it. Like outside of Los Angeles, yes, we should let more areas burn, in unpopulated areas. But then you have to be able to have control burns to say where and when it happens, just like Florida does.
Yeah,
So,
and then you also harden the buildings.
yeah.
So we have done that for earthquakes. We've been hardening the buildings for against earthquakes. Florida has been hardening them against hurricanes. You should see all the rules there are with regard to how you have to build a house or a building now in Florida to withstand X numbers of miles of winds. I've seen that because of some of the consulting that I've done over the last few years. And then in Los Angeles, we do have hardening. We've eliminated shake roofs, et cetera, because they were a real problem with these burns. But there's a lot of other ways that you can additionally harden all the buildings in fire-prone areas in order to make them less likely to catch fire. Once you make one building less likely to catch fire, are
Mhm.
less likely to burn and throw off shingles that might start a fire on another house. The more of that you can do, the more likely you are to keep the thing contained.
Do you want to stop sharing the photo there and just
Absolutely. Sure.
yeah. So I think that just have to be prepared ahead of time. Once you again, if you do think ahead of time, like for anti-hurricane or anti-fire, the costs are far less. That hurricane nails, just having nail or screws that are twice the cost, and then you can strengthen your building and make it withstand 10 times more hurricane forces. And if you build a building with the right materials, um, the right roofs and that kind of stuff, you can greatly reduce greatly increase the resistance to fires. And if you manage the brush around buildings and stuff like that, there are buildings that have survived
Right.
this fire by not having the materials near it to cause for things to burn. So it is something that preparation ahead of time, you can greatly reduce the cost. It
Yeah,
would maybe only like $1 billion a year versus one year with $150 billion or $200 billion.
exactly. And guess what, Los Angeles? This will happen again.
Yeah.
You can be absolutely 100%. Brian is, well known for his predictive capabilities. Brian, would you make a prediction with regard to whether there will be another very expensive fire in Los Angeles?
Yes, that'd be guaranteed. Even with preparation, we'll just reduce it and make it less costly. But fires will happen. They just always do.
All right. Okay. So that I think that was I almost want to say, called it a lot of fun, but given the circumstances, it's really hard to call it fun. But the reality is, this is yeah, sure, the barn door. We're trying to close the barn door after the horses have escaped. But the truth is, this is commonly a time when innovations come to mind, and this is the time to take advantage of any kind of wisdom, even if it's from Randy. I mean,
Mhm.
Brian wisdom, sure, everybody should
Yeah.
take advantage of that. But we should be taking a look at this and making some decisions for the future that will make this a lot better than this situation that we've just endured.
Yes, and still ongoing. The fires are not contained.
And still on.
So
Yeah,
best of luck to all those people and firefighters and everyone else involved.
absolutely. All right. Well, Brian, thanks for joining, and we will see these folks again.